What did you think you would be when you grew up?
Um, I always wanted to be a nurse. And
Always from the start? That never
from the
changed?
start, I always wanted to be a nurse. And the other thing I was interested in was photography, which turned out to be my hobby. So
Okay,
I am a nurse.
yeah. What is your happiest memory from those days as a child?
As a child,
Whether it's school or outside school, whatever.
um, happiest memories at school were definitely things with friends, just all kinds of activities with friends, field trips. With family, I would say hiking, which continues to be our family's kind of favorite today.
Okay. Tell me about someone from growing up who really inspired you.
Um, Trying to think. Somebody who really inspired me. I had a few teachers who I thought were really inspirational. One in particular in high school, Miss Desomes, who was our German and French teacher for the school, who just, I think, really inspired us to be self confident, regardless of where we were in life or what we were experiencing at home or at school,
Okay.
to have a sense of self and be proud of who you are. And I really liked that about her.
Describe the first day you remember desegregation efforts starting at your school. How was it different? Familiar?
I think I was pretty young when desegregation started. And, like a lot of kids, I was, focused on myself, my friends, my school, my family, but I think there were conversations about it before it actually began, but I don't remember a lot of that. I didn't pay a lot of attention, but what I do remember is when it actually started and when we started having kids from mostly the Rainier Valley area bused to our school in the Arbor Heights area. Arbor Heights at the time was a predominantly white neighborhood. The Rainier Valley at the time was a predominantly black neighborhood. But I think describing them that way, and particularly the Rainier Valley, is a little limiting because there were actually a lot of backgrounds represented in that neighborhood, which I got to know as I got older. The cultural diversity that was at the time living in that area versus what was, living or who was living in our area, which, really predominantly a white neighborhood. So it was an influx of change when we started having other children come to the neighborhood school. I was going to Arbor Heights in, I recall, fourth grade. I'm quite certain that's the year that busing started for me, but don't quote me on that because it could have been the year before. But I do recall fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. There were kids bused, and yeah, those are my first recollections of it. I mean, as a kid, you're a kid. You see other kids,
Do
and
you
all of a sudden they looked a little different.
do you remember teachers or staff or adults like kind of telling you that this was going to happen before it really did happen?
I think they did,
It
but
it just wasn't
I,
didn't register until
until it
the
occurred.
change actually occurred. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure they did because I can't imagine that there would be that big of a change in,
Yeah.
school attendees without kids being told. But like I said, I mean, as a kid, I was always kind of daydreaming, thinking my own things, thinking about my friends, and it just didn't really affect me that much until I started seeing interactions around me that people were reacting to it in sometimes in negative ways that actually kind of took me aback because I didn't expect it. I mean, I guess I didn't know what to expect because like I said, I wasn't really thinking too much about it until it happened.
Uh, do you have any recollection of like a first day that it started happening? Because they were bused to you first, right?
To us first in elementary, and then I was bused as a high school student. Um, Not a first day. I don't know if it was on like the actual first day of school or if it happened mid-year. I don't recall.
Okay.
Probably was the first day of the year,
Okay.
I'm guessing.
Okay. So after a summer or something.
Yeah.
Okay. What were your parents' hopes for you and your education? How did they talk to you about it?
Um, they didn't really talk too much about it to me in the elementary years. I can say as we neared high school years, there was a little bit of a break for me in like the middle school years because I was put into a special program for like supposedly gifted children. I didn't really, I didn't like it that much, so I didn't stay. So those years were kind of a, a sidebar for me. But then by the time I got to high school, there were a lot of parents in the neighborhood who were talking about sending their children to a private school, particularly Kennedy High School, which was in the Arbor Heights-ish neighborhood. And I absolutely didn't want to go. I wanted to go to public school. I wanted to go where my friends were going.
Okay.
It did not matter to me that I would be bused, that I would have to get up early or be home later. Some of the things my parents were concerned, or at least my dad was concerned about. And I think in the neighborhood, some of the other parents, I mean, were straight up concerned about sending their kids to a neighborhood that wasn't predominantly white. And to us as kids, by that time, we'd formed all kinds of friendships and we wanted to be with our friends. And
Was your dad or your mom upset about that in any way?
my
Was there
mom,
pushback when
yeah,
you wanted to stay public?
my dad, to a degree, because I think some of the other people that he was influenced by wanted, that private school education that they felt would be better. My mom, your grandma, was more supportive of what I wanted.
Okay.
And ultimately, that's what we did. We all were bused, me and my sister. My brothers were quite a bit older and had long since graduated, so they weren't affected by any of this. They'd all, stayed in the neighborhood schools,
So
but
only you and your sister
only
had
me and my
dealt
sister.
with this. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and we're bused, and that's how we did it.
Do you remember specific, and when you say this, can you speak to your son, please?
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember specific messages adults would say in the whiter neighborhoods, why they were afraid of mixing in with blacker neighborhoods?
I don't remember exactly what was said, but I just, as a child, I recall the tone. The tone was a sense of racism, of, I don't want my children going to those schools, or those schools aren't as good. They're not going to get the same type of education. They're less safe. And I mean, those are not words I'm really quoting, but those were the tones that I felt came from those conversations. And it was interesting to me because I'm like, well, these kids are here in our schools. Like, why does it matter whether we're here or there? The school is just a physical place. But there seemed to be a lot more concern from the neighborhood community about us kids being bused to that region for the high school than there was for Rainier Valley kids to come to our schools. And I remember thinking at the time, even though I was pretty young, that was weird. Like, why did that matter? Why did they not want us to go to those schools? What was so unsafe about those neighborhoods? And, of course, in my mind, I was thinking, well, is there any truth to this? Is what they're saying true? And obviously it never was what I experienced. I loved where I went to high school.
Okay. Was there anyone from those days who tried to make the transition easier for you?
Friends, definitely friends, and some teachers. There were some teachers in the elementary age groups that I thought were really supportive of desegregation efforts and were kind, understanding, and, offered conversation and support to anyone. And in high school, I think more so in high school, I feel like the high school teachers that I interacted with and like counselors and support people were more supportive than the ones in the elementary years. And maybe that has to do with the fact that in the elementary years it was new, the desegregation efforts had just started, or maybe it was just location. I can't really say for sure.
Were there any kids who were with you the whole time who were bused to your school and then you proceeded to go to high school with them?
Yes.
Were you friends with them?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell me about one of them.
I remained friends and am still friends with a set of twins that I met in elementary, Tilo and Moya, who ended up going to high school with me, graduated and walked with me. I still know them as adults today. I don't hang out with them too much, but like we're all Facebook friends. But I remember like doing parties and, birthday parties, things you do in elementary school with them in attendance, and then going to high school and growing up together.
Okay.
Do you have any experiences from being a child where race did become something, where you did see yourself as an outsider or them being an outsider?
Yeah. We were just talking about this the other day. I have one experience that sticks out as pretty horrific for me, actually, in elementary school, where my teacher, who I had really liked and respected, I thought he was fun. He would read to us a lot, unique books, and I really liked that side of him in fourth grade, who butted heads with a boy in our class who was a boy who was bused. His name was Parnell. I can still see his face. Parnell was, an active kid, had a hard time sitting down, would talk back to the teacher sometimes. And it's not like he was the only kid who ever did that. We were all kind of obnoxious, but Mr. Wagner was rough on Parnell, I thought, way rougher than on anybody else. Like, I felt he singled this kid out. And there was a time where I don't remember the exact altercation, but he grabbed Parnell, took him outside. Our classroom had a doorway that went to a little kind of foyer between two classrooms that was outdoors, and closed the door. There was some kind of altercation. Parnell came back in and actually had blood on his face and on his t-shirt. He was wearing a white t-shirt and sat back down at his desk, and the teacher just kind of shushed us all and acted as if nothing happened. And he beat Parnell up. And sorry. This was like in fourth grade. It's a long time ago. But it was awful. And it was totally unfair to Parnell. And I can't imagine how he felt.
Do you remember how you felt that day?
Awful. I felt bad for Parnell. I was completely let down by a teacher who I had respected, because I just didn't see that kind of thing as happening. It had never happened to me before in my elementary. I thought there were teachers who did some things that were unfair or mean, but, kids' perception is what it is. But I am sure as an adult today that my perception on that issue was right on. That should have never happened.
Was there a time where you felt unsafe or excluded at school yourself? Not seeing an experience like that?
Nothing like that, no. And not in elementary. I don't think in elementary. In high school, I think there were some times I felt a little excluded. It wouldn't have had, in my opinion, anything to do specifically with race. I felt like we, as a student body, integrated well together. There were times that I felt like, and this, it was the 80s, that when I had homosexual friends, I was cast aside because of that, because, it wasn't cool to hang out with homosexual people. It was a very different acceptance than it is today, which thankfully I think we've progressed in that area. But yeah.
I think there's a lot of stereotypes about segregation because we think about the South and how blatant racism is. There's a settler racism, I think, that happened with the West Coast. Can you kind of talk about like how racism was in Seattle back then? What it kind of felt and looked like?
As a child, I mean, I guess I didn't really think about it too much. Like I said, in elementary, this was all happening, and I think there were all kinds of discussions about it that went right over my head as a kid. But in my high school years and even in middle school years, I think I started to really take notice that there was racism and it was all around me in my neighborhood. And that the desegregation efforts were needed. And to a degree, we were taught why. I think especially like 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, these things started being introduced, what our history was, where we had come from, and how, relatively recent it was that things were truly segregated and there were laws that were unfavorable to communities of color. And it became a lot more real for me then. Like I mentioned, as a child, I was in my child's world and just thinking about children's things. But it, definitely became real. And I think there was just a sense that it should remain divided. I think we were talking about this the other day too. I had a good friend of the family who kind of same thing. I respected and really liked them. And I remember the mom of the family saying she would never want her white daughters to marry a black man or anyone of color because, not that she was a racist, she would say, but because they would have a harder time. Having an interracial marriage is somehow more difficult because people are less accepting. Yeah.
Well, extrapolating on that a little more, then what do most people misunderstand about desegregation in schools? Like some misconceptions that you've run into?
I think some misconceptions are people felt it was forced on them, that they didn't have a say or didn't have a choice. And that may be partially true to some degree. However, I feel like it was needed. Another one was that the children didn't want to do this, and that children would be better off if we just keep neighborhoods and communities apart from one another. Also, I felt that wasn't true, that we benefited from connections with other cultures. And that children would have a tough time. And, kids are kids. And I think we got an opportunity to learn so much from that.
What would be your advice to teachers, parents, and administrators to realize that promise of integration?
Keep an open mind. And that, I guess that advice kind of goes to a lot of things, but that we learn when we really start to sit down and listen to other people's experiences. I think one of the things that came up during that time is that there would be a sense of, sometimes people from the Rainier Valley communities were less advantaged as far as, economically or job opportunities, things like that. And I think that to a degree is true for many families, not all. And that there would be a sense of, feeling like going into the Arbor Heights schools, like, oh, these kids come from these communities that have more than we do. And there's a sense that, well, we're not equal and we're not feeling up to what they have, the clothes, the houses, the, belonging to clubs or whatever. And I think I did feel that to agree to a degree. Our family belonged to the Arbor Heights Swim Club, which is a place that you can pay monthly to go swimming, especially in the summer. It's open because outdoor pool. And our school brought all the kids to that pool just for a day, like a swim day, which for me was like fun. I was like, oh, going to the club, the place that I know.
Yeah.
And for all of the kids from the Rainier Valley area, it was new to them. And I think some of them did feel like, oh, this is something we don't have access to. And that made me realize my privilege straight up.
Okay.
But it also helped me to think, but I don't know how it made them feel and them think. Like, how would that affect their look on the future
Okay.
versus mine?
As though they were unwelcome guests or something
Yeah.
like that.
Or that there's opportunities out there that they didn't have access to.
Okay. When it comes to desegregation in schools, would you do anything differently if you were in the shoes of the adults or teachers or?
I think, I mean, especially today, of course, we're talking about back then, but one of the things that was very enlightening to me, especially in high school, is that this wasn't just about white communities and black communities. We had so many different cultures at Rainier Beach and backgrounds, and putting an emphasis on integration versus desegregation. I mean, desegregation is very, very important, and I don't want to lose sight of that. But there was also another piece that I think was never emphasized, that we're talking about all kinds of people. We had so many different backgrounds represented at Rainier Beach, and that, to me, that just made it super fun. It made it, we got to learn so much that I never would have learned in my, kind of straight-laced little white community.
Have you ever thought about how different your life would be if you didn't live in or you didn't grow up in a desegregated environment?
I have, and I have had an opportunity to experience what it may have been. So, after my marriage ended with my kid's father, we moved up north to the Lake Stevens area, which pretty area, less expensive than Seattle. I couldn't afford to be a single mom in the city anymore. But it turned out to be a pretty white neighborhood. And my kids got a different kind of a school experience than I did for the most part. And you can tell me what your experience felt like, but
It was, overwhelmingly white.
yeah,
Like 96, 97%.
percent.
There was a couple individuals, but nowhere near anything that you grew up with. It was extraordinarily whitewashed.
Yeah. And it kind of made me sad because I felt like you guys missed out on something that I had. I mean, the education was good academically, but there was something missed there. But I also went to work for a company that turned out to also be predominantly white. I mean, partly just because I guess the neighborhood, but a lot of the attitudes there took me back 2 years past. I realized pretty quickly on that I was in a somewhat racist community again, and I thought we had moved past that. We hadn't. And that made me sad. I think it started to grow over time, that company, but eventually I followed my heart to where I am now. Once Kaiser Permanente moved up to this region, I joined them right away because they have such an emphasis on equity, inclusion, and diversity. That really mattered to me, and an emphasis on reaching out to the community and making sure that underserved communities have opportunity for healthcare. So for me, that mattered. Being in a for-profit company that was very, in my mind, single-minded and focused just on going after higher income communities just didn't feel right. And I feel like how I grew up in my school and my education influenced that and how I approach work and healthcare.
Okay. What legacy do you want to leave for your family and community then?
Like I had talked about, how we should approach desegregation overall, or how we could have, is like keep an open mind that you have so much to learn. And I think that's even more so than talking about culturally diverse communities, but just anything. There's so much you can learn from people if you're willing to listen. And that could apply to like political, listening to somebody from a different political spectrum or thought process than you, that sometimes if we really sit down and listen to what somebody's values and thoughts are, maybe we will learn something that, helps us to think a little differently than we did. And that's really what I took from the desegregation efforts, is that it taught me some things that I would have never thought I needed to learn. You don't know what you don't know. And keeping an open mind allows you to learn so much more and grow.
Yeah, you said something earlier, Cindy. You said a lot of white folks thought this was forced upon them.
Mm-hmm.
We did some recordings in Boston, and we talked to some white folks, and that's exactly what they said. They felt like this was forced on them.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of speak to that attitude of where that kind of came from?
I think it comes from a place of not knowing and not understanding that when we're faced with something we don't understand, we tend to resist and be fearful. Even if it's something simple like traveling to another country, it's like we want to go, but we're like, I don't know what to expect. We tend to want to do the same things. We find a place we like to go. Oh, I like Hawaii or something. We go back to Hawaii again and again. But when it comes to like working or going to school with somebody from a different race, different background, if you haven't done it before, that was scary to them. And how we're taught history is, at least how I was taught history, was ridiculous. It made it look like the white explorer was just like the greatest thing ever, and we conquered all these lands. But the reality is we ravaged all kinds of other cultures and communities to get our way. So we had this sense of superiority, I think, that put us in a place of just feeling like our way is the right way. And I think Americans as a whole have that to some degree. Why go to another country? Why do anything different? Because we live in the best place possible. It's not necessarily true. Doesn't mean we don't have anything to offer, though. It's nice to be able to share our stories too. So I'm really glad I get to do this today. My perspective is my own, and I'm sure it's not the same as anybody else's.
Do you remember any of your, like, say, your friends' parents, like, specifically that mentality that was described? Like,
yeah.
Were any of them like they didn't want you to spend time around their child anymore because of it? Anything like that?
I don't remember that specifically, but a lot of parents, and then some of their kids too, would come to school. Kids say what they hear at home, and you would hear a lot of racial slurs in school, and it was coming from the parents. Kids don't come up with that stuff by themselves. So yeah, definitely there was that mentality among parents. But I think some of my closer friends over time the parents started to see things differently once they started to see that we were integrating and we did have friends of other backgrounds, and it was possible to integrate. And I think parents started learning some from the kids. Not all. I'm sure there were some parents who were very resistant, and I think I tended to slowly start to back away from some of those families and friends. But the ones I stayed close to, I thought their minds opened, and I'm proud to say that my dad's did too.
Okay. Do you have like a specific memory of someone who was either had their mind changed or kind of accepted it and supported it from the beginning?
I think my mom did. She was pretty accepting from the beginning. Her experience is a little different since she's somebody who wasn't born and raised in the United States. She was born and raised in Germany, came here after meeting my dad as a soldier, getting pregnant, and came here. She was like 20. Had a really rough time assimilating to our culture, to his family, and learning English. It was all new for her. So I think her perspective was a little bit different than the average American person in our neighborhood. She looked at things from the perspective of a foreigner, even though her skin matched the neighborhood. Her attitudes didn't
She knew what
necessarily.
it was like to feel like an outsider,
Yeah.
but in a different manner.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she was very supportive. And she also just so happened to have closely befriended a Black woman at work and a Vietnamese woman at work. And those were like her two best friends. And I think she looked at them and the friendship she had with them as like, well, you know, this is the kind of environment my daughters are going to be in. And what's wrong with that?
What was your dad's opinion of these friends? If you remember.
Yeah, you know, my mom kind of kept her like work life a little separate, I guess. Like she would go out for drinks with the ladies after work now and then and do things on the weekend with them, but they didn't like get all together as couples or anything. Like sometimes you think of married partners doing that. I don't remember my parents doing too much of that. They did like with relatives, like with my uncles and aunts, but
they kept their social lives
a little bit separate.
For the most
Yeah.
part. Okay.
And he didn't really have an opinion one way or the other.
So he would just go hang out with the guys, and it wasn't a big deal.
He golfed.
Okay, got it.
So, but yeah, I kind of liked that about my mom, like her sort of different perspective with it.
Okay.
Cindy, do you have any moments that you remember, like, clashing or differing with your dad, or maybe even a series of moments where you heard his opinion change about something? Because he initially wanted you to go to
the private high school, in our neighborhood. And he never like outright said anything that made me feel like, oh my God, that's so inappropriate, you know, but it was a tone, you know. But I just feel like slowly over time, he started to look at things differently. But I can't remember a single moment where I was like, oh, aha, my dad is looking at life differently. But I know, my brother ended up marrying a woman from China. And, you know, by the time that happened, which was years later, he didn't bat an eye. So, I mean, definitely things had changed for him, like how he looked at who his kids were hanging out with or who they chose to date. Early on in my high school years, I can remember I went out with Derek, a young Black man, and when he came to pick me up, he'd never been to my house before. He drove to my house, and he said he got to my neighborhood and what he thought was the address and thought he could see it. It was dark, but asked somebody outside, oh, does Cindy Buske live here? And the person outside said no. And then we didn't have cell phones back then. He went to the nearest Safeway and called me via a payphone. And he's like, well, I went to what I think was your address. We were going to go to a movie. And he's like, but the guy there said that you don't live there. And I have no proof of this, but I swear that was my own dad. and it makes me go, But I did go out with Derek a few times after that, and then we stayed friends throughout high school.
What grade was this? Just out of
I
curiosity.
think I was in 10th and he was in 11th.
Okay.
It's like the end of my 10th grade year-ish, but I once again, don't mark my words on that. But yeah, his attitudes then, which were apparently, oh, I don't want my mom or my daughter going out with this guy, to, how he grew in his later years to be accepting of at least his son marrying into another culture was different. And then I think,
Did Derek go to Rainier Beach as well? Or
yeah,
okay.
yeah. And then as with you kids, I mean, I feel like you guys brought home friends from different backgrounds, and Grandpa and Omi didn't really, didn't
Yeah.
even
It was
register
always
much.
normal when I was a kid.
Yeah.
We have about 5 minutes left. I have a question for you. You grew up in a really contentious moment in American history regarding race.
Yeah.
It was a huge inflection point. Did you think we'd be further along 50, 60 years later?
Now, like where we
Yeah,
are
where
now.
we are now.
I honestly feel like, at least, I don't know if it's just media influence, political influence, but I honestly feel like we're taking some steps back. I think that with our last presidency, not the current one, but the one before, we had things happen that, I almost feel like it was a backlash to the presidency of a black man, of Obama. And that to me tells me we have not come nearly as far as I want to believe that we have. That maybe some of us have, but we're not where we need to be. We have so much to learn from each other. And to me, it's really sad because I think trying to keep our communities completely segregated and unable to learn from one another just stops us from growing.
Some of that mentality gets pushed under the surface until the people believe that now it's okay again. And that's kind of what you're getting at with the last president, is when they think that they're emboldened to speak their true beliefs when, whoever says so or acts so.
Yeah, if somebody else does it, then it's okay. But where those are coming from and how to address them is a whole different issue. Like, I don't know, how do you meet people where they are to talk to them and hear their stories and understand their fears if what they're saying is so fundamentally opposed to your own beliefs? It's really hard to do that, but I think we kind of almost have to move forward. But I don't think we're at a place where we can move away from finding ways to support underprivileged or underrecognized communities in the workplace and in school, because they are still in those places. Like, it's not an equal playing ground. And I think that's where we need to move to, where everybody, regardless of where they came from or the color of their skin or what their background is, has the same ability in life, the same opportunities.
Can you talk to the values you try to instill in your children? And then, Josh, how well is she doing?
Well, just those, kind of what I've outlined is what I had hoped to instill in my children. You can say where that's taken you.
I think you did great with all of us kids. I mean, like, Zach went to Seattle schools, so his upbringing was a little different, what he experienced. But me and Anya went to a very whitewashed school. There's absolutely a lot of blatant racism in Lake Stevens and subtle racism, and that didn't really stick with me. I didn't really start to think like those people did, or how their parents did, or whatever.
That's
It's
true.
just not what I was raised to believe was right or fair. And I was pretty glad to have actually gotten away from that town, actually.
Yeah.
I don't ever see myself going back, even if it is you know, a nice summer destination. Just the community mentality is frustrating.
It is frustrating.
Like,
We didn't fit in. We
No,
didn't
not
fit
at
in
all.
our own neighborhood. It was a night. It was inexpensive. We could afford it, and it was pretty out there. But it was. I never felt at home in my own neighborhood. I only had one neighbor who I could relate to in that little section. I don't feel that now living in Everett.
Okay.